In this video, we're going to be talking about the general predictive values of each and every practice test for the USMLE Step 1 and what order you should be taking these practice tests based on where you are in terms of your preparation. Hey guys, for those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Dr. Chala and I'm an international medical graduate doing my internal medicine residency in the United States. I try to make videos to break down and simplify the process to get into residency. If you have any questions at all or would like to see any other videos, please leave a comment in the comment section down below or add me on Instagram at Dr. Chala and I'll get back to your messages as soon as possible. And if you find this content helpful, please leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. So in my previous video, I talked about different tips and things you need to know to optimize each and every single practice test. And I'll leave that link in the description down below. But in this video, I want to talk about the different NBMEs that are present, their general predictive values, and what order you should be taking them. Now, before going forward, I do want to say that there is no right or wrong order to write your NBMEs. But after asking many people who got over 240s and 250s, and after doing extensive research, I think I've established an order that might work for most people. Before getting to the order, I do want to talk about the different NBMEs that we have and their predictive values. So in terms of practice tests, you have two types. We have our NBMEs and our UWorld self-assessments. Your NBMEs start from NBME 13 and go all the way up to NBME 24, with an exception of 14. There is no NBME 14. Now, like I said in the previous video, all the earlier NBMEs are less predictive because all of those concepts are already well established into our curriculum. Now, I do understand that there are more NBMEs that may be coming out in the future, and I'll incorporate those into another video if you find this helpful. Now, let's start with NBME 18. Now, NBME 18 is known to be one of the most predictive NBMEs till date. Now, because NBME 18 is relatively old, a lot of the concepts are already incorporated into the curriculum, but this is compensated by a really hard curve. So even if you get a small number of questions wrong, it can drastically affect your score. Again, although NBME 18 is predictive, it can be an outlier. People either get close to their NBME 18 score, or it can also be an under predictor. Then we have our NBME 19. Most people I ask say that NBME 19 is a relatively easier test with easier questions which don't require an extensive level of question strategy and educated guesses. However, with this, again, there's a harder curve, so it's very easy to get a low score in your NBME 19 because even a small number of questions wrong can drastically affect your score. Then we have our NBME 20, 21, and 22. All of these are relatively newer practice tests, and they're known to grossly under predict your scores. So try not to get affected if you don't do so well in these practice tests. Now, from what I've been able to gather, these tend to under predict just because these tests are a little unbalanced. Some have a little bit more anatomy questions, some have a little bit more ethics questions. Now, there's an argument that they're adding more ethics to the main test, but from the research that I've done, I've noticed that it generally under predicts pretty significantly. From my understanding, NBME 23 is one of the only NBMEs that you can refrain from actually doing because it's completely not predictive, it's not balanced at all, and it's a pretty difficult test. Now, I personally would prefer to do every single NBME just to better prepare you for the actual test, but if you're planning to not take a newer NBME, it would be this one. Now, lastly, our newest NBME, or NBME 24, is known to be one of the easier tests. So I've heard that this test can either be predictive for a few, but most likely it's gonna over predict your score. Now let's come to the UWorld self-assessments. You have two UWorld self-assessments, your UWSA 1 and UWSA 2. Now, UWorld self-assessment 1 is known to be quite over predicted by at least 10 to 15 points for most people, but UWSA 2 is known to be one of the most predictive tests. When it comes to UWSA 2, there are two types of people. There are people who get closer to UWSA 2, and there are people where it slightly over predicts your score. But with all this in mind, your UWorld self-assessments are going to be the ones that are most similar to your actual test. Now, although I described the general trends of each and every single NBME, remember that there are so many outliers, and if you've had a different experience with any of the tests, please leave it in the comment section down below so you can help inform others with what you've experienced. Now let's come to the order. Now, I've made two orders. One for people who have around 5 to 6 months left to write their test, and one for people who have around 2 to 3 months to write their test. Now let's talk about the long-term plan first. So if you have around 5 to 6 months to prepare for the test, you have enough time to take your less predictive NBMEs. Now, some people will argue that you don't have to, but in my opinion, whether they're predictive or not is secondary if you're writing them early on. You can use them to practice working against question fatigue, developing question strategy, and remember, most of these concepts are really high yield. They can just provide a different set of questions that will help you learn your information better. Now, I would start with either NBME 13 or NBME 15 to create a baseline score. I made a different video on when I believe you should take your first NBME, and I'll leave the link down in the description. But do either NBME 13 or NBME 15, take your score with a grain of salt, and remember, this is just to get acclimated to the entire test taking process. So I divide your NBME into two phases. The phase where you're just trying to set a baseline, and the phase where you're actually trying to assess yourself. Coming to the first phase, NBMEs 13, 15, 16, and 17 can really be taken in any order. My preference would be to take them as soon as you finish your first round of UWorld and First Aid, and you can take each one 2 to 3 weeks apart just to keep yourself engaged. Then you have your second phase where you're trying to properly assess yourself, and I would start with NBME 20. The reason I say this is because it's one of the harder tests and it underpredicts your score, so it'll help light a fire to kickstart your study. Then after that, I prefer to do NBME 24 just because it's one of the easier tests and it'll help you get some self-confidence after what's probably going to be a bad test. After that, probably NBME 19 because it's one of the easier tests with the hard curve, so it's going to keep you on your toes, and at the same time you'll be better equipped to write the test because the questions are relatively easier. Then I'd suggest you do NBME 21 and 22 just because you're getting closer to your test. This will really keep you on your toes and help you apply your knowledge. Now remember that these tests are relatively unbalanced and can grossly underpredict your scores, so it's important not to get discouraged by it. Now you can do your UWSA anytime between or after these just to give you that self-confidence that you really need and to understand the style of questions the actual test is going to be. I personally prefer 21, UWSA 1, then 22. Lastly, you have your 2 predictive practice tests, which is your NBME 18 and your UWSA 2. I'd suggest you take your NBME 18 first and then UWSA 2 later. People generally get lower on their NBME 18. It provides a predictive score on the lower end, whereas UWSA 2 will give you the self-confidence you need for the exam, and it provides a predictive score on the higher end. Now, I personally had a 10-point difference between my NBME 18 and my UWSA 2, but my score was closer to my NBME 18 and it was in between the two. Now, this really varies from person to person, and some people get closer to their 18 and other people get closer to UWSA 2. So always remember to take these with a grain of salt. So just to summarize, here's an order that I think that you should take your NBMEs in. But if you feel differently, please leave in the comment section down below. Remember that this isn't the only way to take these tests and everyone does it differently. So let's say you have only 2 months left for your test. So then you're mainly going to focus on the phase 2 where you only take your predictive tests or your more important NBMEs. The order I would prefer to take it in would be 21st to have a hard exam, then 19 just to lighten the mood but keep you on your toes, then 21 for a hard test again, UWSA 1 just so you get a feel of the test and it can lighten the mood with a good score, and then 22 where you take an important test that can be an outlier. The last 3 I would say would be to do 24 just because it's an easier test, it over predicts and puts you in a better mood for the test, and 18 in UWSA 2 just like your previous one. Again, just to summarize, here is the order in which I think you can take your NBMEs if you only have 2 months left. Now if you have any other suggestions or something different worked for you, please leave it in the comment section down below. Feel free to ask any questions and add me on Instagram at Dr. Chala. And if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Thank you. And while you're still here, check out some other videos on my channel. My videos are aimed to help IMGs with the entire USMLE process and help them match into residency. Good luck.